Hello and welcome to episode 143 of the Palestine Pod, the weekly podcast where we break down the latest headlines dealing with Palestine from all over the world and bring you stories, commentary, and interviews with the aim of supporting the Palestinian struggle for decolonization, justice, and equal rights. I'm one of your hosts, Lara E. You might know me from Instagram as @GazanGirl, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mikey B. Today, we are joined by Dr. Salman Abu Sitta. He's a Palestinian academic, best known for his crucial work documenting Palestine's land and its people through his extensive mapping of Palestine and formulating a practical return for Palestinian refugees in accordance with international law. He's the founder and president of the Palestine Land Society, and he's worked for over 40 years within the context of the Palestine Land Studies Center, established at the American University in Beirut. He's the author of over 400 articles and papers on Palestine, as well as several books. Most notable amongst them include his series of atlases documenting Palestine at different periods in its history, including the Atlas of Palestine 1948, the Atlas of Palestine 1917 to 1966, the Atlas of Palestine 1871 to 1877, and the Atlas of Palestine Land Theft by the Jewish National Fund. He is a former member of the Palestine National Council and a member of several organizations dealing with Palestinian rights, human rights, and international law. Dr. Salman, it was the highlight of my life to meet you in Kuwait last year. I remember when we met that you were so full of hope and so inspired by the solidarity that you had seen, the outpouring of support for Palestinians worldwide. And you told me that you had never seen anything like this before. And it really made a mark on me because I was very depressed, to be honest, when I met you, seeing what was going on in Gaza day after day after day. I think it really impacted Palestinians first and foremost on the ground, in terms of just the heaviness of what was happening, but also Palestinians in forced exile who were watching this. You obviously have a lot more experience than we do in terms of having seen the Nakba play out since its inception, yourself being a Nakba survivor. So maybe just to start with, can you give our viewers a sense of why it is that you have this hope in this moment, and what are the historical events that you've lived through that allow you to see what's happening today in a different way?
Thank you very much for having me, Lara and Michael. Yes, indeed. There are two events which I have witnessed in 1948 and now, which are miles apart in terms of time, but they are the same subject, although with vastly different dimensions. What's happening now is a genocide in the full meaning of the word. Full meaning of the word because everybody in the world now see it. It's being displayed on TV and conferences and meetings and all that. Everybody can see this, from Chile in South America to New Zealand. Nobody can say, I did not know. So the knowledge is now available to everyone, which gives them a responsibility to act. In 1948, nobody knew about us. There were only few Western agencies which was describing the Israeli and Zionist conquest of our country, Palestine, making us all refugees from 530,000 villages, make that portrayed as the victory of the righteous, who are settlers from Europe, against the savage Arabs who are trying to prevent them from taking over their country. Today, the same thing is played, but in two different fields. In the official circles of the Western world, this same theory is applied and assumption is applied that we are the villains and the people who kill our children and women are the righteous one. Everybody um, comes forward in the West to support them by every possible means, by bombs, by political support, by every possible means. Um, you can see the Western leaders going in throngs to Netanyahu, paying homage to him for killing women and children. Today, almost 200,000 Palestinians in Gaza uh, have been killed or injured in view of the whole world. Now, who is standing up for Palestinians? Who is standing for justice for people whose um, only um, excuse of being attacked is that they live in their own country? The people of the world, young people in the universities, writers, people, societies advocating human rights, ordinary people around the world, they all see us. They all demonstrate in their countries, in their own ways, to support us. That was not the case before at all. The dimensions also in Nakba um, is very different. In 1948, we have been expelled through 95 massacres from 530 towns and villages. The Jewish settlers, the Zionist Jewish settlers in 1948, under 30 years of British collusion, they managed only to control 5.5% of Palestine. But in 1948, the Haganah, the terrorist organization which became later Israel Defense Force, occupied 20,500 square kilometers of Palestine, which is 78%. They depopulated 530,000 villages. They made about 1 million Palestinian refugees, who are today 9 million. So, in terms of land conquered and in terms of people became refugees, 1948 is vastly different from today. Today, um, they, Israel, with tons and thousands of tons of bombs, they gained no new territory, not one, no new territory. But they killed so many more than 1948. In 1948, only the United Nations knew about misfortune. And then the Red Cross came along, and then the United Nations created UNRWA. Today, there are piles and piles of UN resolutions against Israeli occupation and, and against Israeli war crimes in ICC and ICJ. All this pile of world condemnation produced nothing to Israel. On the contrary, the same Western countries um, in 1948, which created it, are the ones who are now supporting it. And the rest of the world, other than the human conscience of young people, is silent. No penalties, no remedy from the United Nations or from the rest of the world against Israel ominous crimes. This is most unusual because before we could say people did not know, but now they know. And the people who know more than anybody else are the Western leaders who are actually helping Israel to commit its crimes. So here you have a situation in which Trump punishes the International Criminal Court because they are telling the truth. This is an unusual situation, absolutely. In the past, people who committed crimes hid their crimes and did not advertise them. Now they publicly say, we do this. Trump says, I'm going to empty Gaza from its people. That's clearly a war crime. Ethnic cleansing is a war crime. And, and I could tell you more about who the people are in Gaza.
Yeah, I'd love to turn to that next, but I just want to say something first, which is that you're absolutely right that there is this phenomenon of advertising your mass atrocities. In fact, just in the last couple of weeks, we've had Netanyahu come out and announce a total siege on Gaza. For the last week, no humanitarian aid trucks have entered Gaza. And following that announcement, which in and of itself it indicates collective punishment, it indicates genocidal intent, it indicates genocidal action. We also had the Israeli minister of energy announce the cutting of all electricity to Gaza, again, in violation of Israel's obligations as an occupying power, also indicating genocidal intent and action and indicative of war crimes as well. So this is certainly a strange phenomenon. You mentioned who are the people of Gaza. This is something that I try to remind people often because so many conversations about Gaza in the West, particularly in the mainstream media, are divorced from the understanding of who these people even are. So please tell our audience, who are the people of Gaza? How did they get there? And what are their rights? And if we could go, Michael, to the origin of refugees map.
In 1948, the new army of Israel, before that was called the Haganah, depopulated 530 towns and villages in Palestine. They are dispersed in 5 areas, in refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, West Bank, and Gaza. Gaza remained the only place in Palestine which was not, until recently, conquered by Israel. Its area is 365 square kilometers now, before it was bigger, which is 1.3% of Palestine. And in that small area, the people of 247 towns and villages shown in red dots on the screen have been pushed to and expelled from these towns and villages, pushed towards Gaza Strip, where they found refuge in Gaza Strip. This area, which is 1.3%, has been the home of now 2.3 million people who originally came from the Red Dots. So they are refugees. And not only they are refugees in Gaza, they are hostages in Gaza. They are surrounded by Israel from all directions, land, sea, and air, provided very minimum supplies of food, water, medicine, and other needs. Now they are totally cut off from that. So not only they are in a refugee camp, they are in a concentration camp and surrounded by their enemy. They are, in fact, hostages. They are the true hostages. They have been separated from their homes 27,000 days since 1948. And their aim all the time was to return home. So the hostages are the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. These are the people we should talk about and campaign to for them to return home. I am for all hostages to return home. Let Palestinians return home to these red dots and let the settlers in their land go where they came from. This is the natural thing to do, and not to make the victims criminals and make the criminals to be victims. Let me just tell you how Gaza Strip was created. If you show me second map. Yes, this is the second map. It shows the area of the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip, it's called Strip because it is a piece of Gaza district which remained unoccupied, unable the Israelis were unable to occupy it in 1948. And then there was an armistice agreement with Egypt on 24th of February 1949, saying that the armistice line indicates the line at which the opposing military forces stopped. So the armistice line is not a boundary. It has no legal meaning in that sense. It was only the line at which the fighting forces in 1948 stopped. Now, the real armistice agreement with Egypt identified a line which gave an area of Gaza Strip of 550 square kilometers. 1 year later, after that, in February 1950, Israel advanced again on Gaza Strip, chopped off 200 square kilometers of Gaza Strip, making it the present 365 square kilometers it is today, illegally. The second agreement in 1950, called Modus Vivendi Agreement, which means it was temporary arrangement at the time, which will expire, and the Gaza Strip area goes back to its original area after that. This did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. Israel now is planning to chop off 1 kilometer of the boundary of the Gaza Strip, 1 kilometer on the perimeter of Gaza, reducing it still further by 10 or 15%. In other words, the concentration camp is being tightened more and more and more, and the same people are 2.3 million and increasing with time. This is a clear case of a war crime in every aspect of the world. But nobody talked about it. They talk about it in even more evil terms. Trump says, remove those people in Gaza from their refuge in their own homeland and throw them away somewhere. Take them to Jordan, take them to Egypt, and so on. This act, of course, is a clear case of a war crime. And not only then they have been attacked in their camps, but now they want to remove them completely out of their homeland, that little piece of homeland which is left for them. Let me just say one more thing. Gaza is the only place in Palestine after the Zionist conquest of Palestine which remained raising the flag of Palestine. In what became Israel, the Palestinians were absorbed there. In the West Bank, it was first annexed to Jordan. Now it is under Israeli occupation. So Gaza today is Palestine in every sense of the word, in history and geography and all that. And not only they were attacked today, let me just tell you, for the last 77 years, Gaza Strip was attacked constantly. In 1953, Sharon attacked refugee camps and killing 28 people from Berej camp in their homes, in their beds. In 1971, Sharon demolished the camps in Jabalia in 1971, long time ago. In 1976, they have been trying to cart Palestinians out of Gaza Strip elsewhere. In 1982, when there was the Intifada, they have been attacked by air and by sea. And since 2005, when Israel removed its forces from inside Gaza Strip to outside Gaza Strip, they have been bombarding them for the last 15 years. So today, the genocide in Gaza is the culmination of what was called ethnic cleansing. It now became complete and utter genocide. Yet the world is still silent. We keep telling them there is no point and there is no logic and there is no right, absolutely, under any law, to keep doing that to Palestinians. The only way, and the only way which will bring peace, is to apply international law. How do you apply international law? Let me look at map 3. Apply international law by applying Resolution 194, which says refugees should return home. There is a myriad of resolutions of United Nations saying that. The answer is not to cart people in Gaza as Trump says to wilderness. The answer is to make them return home. And the return home for them is not only natural, but it's also very feasible. They simply can walk home. They don't need planes and ships and campaigns to do that. They simply can literally walk home. They, within 30 kilometers, east and north, they can reach all these red dots. And who is occupying their land today? Who is occupying their land today? Who are the settlers, part of whom were seized in Gaza? Only 150,000 settlers from Eastern Europe occupied the southern half of Palestine, the land of those refugees. 150,000. They are smaller than one refugee camp in Gaza. Yet their density in, in our southern part of Palestine is 7 persons per square kilometers, while the owners of this land are crammed in Gaza Strip at a density of 8,000 persons per square kilometer, more than 1,000 times more than the settlers in their land. And when Israel made the south, the north moved to south, the density in Gaza Strip was 24,000 persons per square kilometer. It's a nightmare. It's something which history will never forget. People crammed at this density while their land is almost empty. In my studies, I made a plan how, if these settlers choose to go back to Tel Aviv, they will be accommodated in Tel Aviv without much trouble. We arranged for them to go in buses. Within 45 minutes, they could reach Tel Aviv, and within 7 days, all the southern part of Palestine will be empty of those settlers. And the people in Gaza and southern Palestine can return home, and peace in this case will be permanent. If not, Israel will continue to kill, and kill, and the Palestinians who remain alive will never give up their right to return.
You spoke about how Gaza came to be and how Israel has continuously over the years tried to make Gaza smaller and smaller and smaller. And it reminds me of an anecdote from when I was speaking with my grandmother, who is in Kuwait. And I asked her, Tata, we were not affected by the Nakba like the other Nakba survivors because we are originally from Gaza. So we're from the 20% of the Palestinians in Gaza who were prior to 1948 from Gaza originally. And she responded to me, no, you're not right. You're not correct. She said, Tata, kan anna aradi. So she was trying to convey to me that the Gaza that we know today is much smaller than the Gaza that existed in 1948 and prior to 1948. And so in the process of the Nakba, what also happened is that the Palestinians who were originally from Gaza that had farmlands, north of Gaza City or to the east of Gaza City, in areas which became Israel, had also their land taken unlawfully by Israel without any compensation, and that they too were deprived of their property and affected by the Nakba through this process. So that was something that I did not realize at the time.
Let me add to this what your grandmother said. She is absolutely right. Of course, naturally, you think Palestine is one country, and people did not live in half a kilometer. They may have land, they may have property, they may have relatives in the next village, in the next town. I mean, Gaza, for example, has lots of relations with Jerusalem, Al Quds, and many of them in Gaza come from Ramla and Lidda, and certainly from Jaffa, and so on. And the people have links and relatives everywhere. So when you actually slice a small piece of Palestine, you actually slice branches and veins of blood from other parts. And in terms of geography, Gaza is part of the Southern District. The Southern District of Palestine is 12,500 square kilometers. It's made up of two districts, one called Gaza District, which is 11,200 square kilometers, and the other one is the rest of the area, which is Beersheba District. And so Gaza people have land in Beersheba District and in Gaza District. Uh, Gaza villages, in the small sense of the word, lived in, as I said, about 1,200 square kilometers. Now they are in 365. So your grandmother is absolutely correct, and there are many examples of that. I mean, um, if you cut a finger of a body, it doesn't mean that the finger is isolated. It's related to the arm and to the heart and all that. So your grandmother is quite correct.
Thank you. Um, you also showed the image of how return is the only legal and moral and just solution to the forced displacement of Palestinians from their homes. And in this current moment, what we're seeing the proposal for even further forced displacement be framed as a humanitarian offer. Oh, we want to save these Palestinians because Gaza has become unlivable, so we can find them nice homes elsewhere. And it reminds me a lot of Zionist thinking since its inception, which was trying to wrestle with this conundrum of the fact that the land that they wanted already had people in it. So they were always trying to theorize, well, what are we going to do with these people? Oh, maybe we can find them homes elsewhere. We can get them jobs abroad. We can, pay them to go somewhere else. The thinking has very much stayed consistent. I want to ask you about the atlases. And then I think Michael will have a question after that. You have authored many atlases: Atlas of Palestine, one that's focused also on the land theft by the Jewish National Fund. Can you, broadly speaking, tell us about the atlases and what they contain and what your hope was when undertaking this massive project to document the history of land theft of Palestinian land?
Before I speak about the atlases, I would like to remind your audience that the war against Palestinians, now represented by clear genocide in Gaza, is the pillar of the Zionist ideology. And I would like to explain that a bit more. In the 19th century, when the idea that Palestine was empty, a land without people, and the Jews of Europe said that we are people without a land, the idea that Palestine is a land without people is a trick. It is an intended uh, crime hidden in terms of this statement. They knew that Palestine has a people. Well, let me just tell you, any ordinary educated person would know that in the 19th century there has been many travelers and many geographers and many priests and visitors and uh, came to Palestine, um, describe its people and land. Gorin, the Frenchman, wrote 8 volumes about Palestine. The British sent an expedition which lasted 5 years. They produced 12 volumes about Palestine, listing 9,000 place names. So they knew. Then what is the purpose of spreading this lie? Palestine is a land without people. The Zionist idea is to make it so, to make Palestine the land people. The germ of genocide was created as the first principle of Zionism, and it is confirmed even in 1940 under the British Mandate, when Joseph Weitz, the head of JNF, said, "We shall not leave one village or one place." That was before Israel was established. The Haganah plan, when they um, depopulated 530 towns and villages, they don't need that if they really want to live in a portion of Palestine. So the germ of the idea of genocide is an intrinsic and pillar of Zionism. That is what I want to emphasize. That's why it is imperative on any Palestinian to record our country, to show that we have history, we have geography, and what I have done in Atlas Palestine 1917 to 1966 in Arabic and English. It is also in Russian and Spanish. And then there is another Atlas Palestine in 1871 to 1877, in which there is not a single Jewish colony in Palestine, is to show that we are no different from any Arab country neighboring us. Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. We were an Arab country with the same people in the same area. How come suddenly this piece of land become a bald spot which has no people? Of course, this is a lie, and actually it is a blueprint for genocide hidden before. Now it is in full force applied, right? So the first thing we have done in Palestine Land Society, which I have formed in London 25 years ago, was to document Palestine and people. And I am glad to say all our work is never disputed, even by Israelis. They cannot, because we document the land they have occupied and taken over, so they know very well this land they have taken over. And therefore, there is no discussion about that. But we took this one more step. Now, what about the future? The Resolution 194 have been affirmed by the United Nations more than 130 times, longer than any resolution in UN history. It is elevated, as you know, Lara, to the level of customary international law. Um, and this is not an invention, and it's not a new thing, because it was passed on 11 December 1948. The day before, on the 10th of December, the same United Nations approved and passed Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is universal, and Declaration of Human Rights. It's universal and it's applied to everybody. Article 13 of this Universal Declaration of Human Rights say everybody has the right to return to their home. So next day, when the United Nations passed Resolution 194, it was a matter of fact. It was a matter of statement. That's all. And therefore, the right of Palestinians to return is indisputable. But the people of what I call of good feeling in Europe, they tell me, but if you return, the Jews there will become refugees, will be Jewish Nakba. Now, first of all, I think the answer to this question, this question itself, is a racist question. If a gangster comes and knocks on your door, kills half of your people, throw them out, and he stays there, and you complain to the neighbors, you say, "Oh, but haram, there is someone there in your house. How do you accept that I stay out in the open while this gangster is taking my home?" So this is a racist question, implying that we are of lesser value than the gangster who took our home. But even so, in our studies, we have found that Israel, as we see it on the map today, is empty. This looks like a strange statement. Yes, I maintain that. 88% of the Jews in Israel live only in 12%, or even less than that, of Israel. They are located in three cantons: Tel Aviv area, Tel Aviv Jaffa area, Western Jerusalem, and Haifa. All the rest is empty, is now occupied by two groups. The first group is the kibbutz. The kibbutz are planted in the refugee land in strategic locations in order to prevent the return of the refugees, to say to the world, every piece of land is already inhabited. Uh, and also the army, uh, which has um, training fields, factories, and all that in 88%. This is my finding, but it's also published in the Survey of Israel. Absolutely, I can send you the document to do that. Now, coming back to the settlers in the kibbutz, their population is 1 to 2% of Israeli population. Take my own case. My own case, I speak to it truthfully. Um, my land is called Al Ma'in Abu Sitta. Its area is 60,000 dunums. And on it, four kibbutz were built, called Nerim, Nir Oz, Ain Hashlusha, and Magan. Four of them. Four of them. You know how many? They live on our land of 60,000 dunums. Now, how many people are there? Each one of them has 400 members. Total around 1,200. How many of our people called Abu Sitta, whose land is there? 12,000. So the land of 12,000 is inhabited by uh, 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 by by 10% of that. Take Narim, for example. I was born on the land of my father on which Narim was built. And by the way, these four kibbutz I told you about are within the part chopped off by Israel from 1949 to 1950. So even at that, it is part of Gaza Strip, even at that level. But um, I tried, for example, to reach those people, not hoping, of course, they will leave tomorrow, but I sent messages through people to the inhabitants and these four kibbutz. Tell them, look, this is my land, and I can rent you a place, an apartment, or a house for 20 years, but you don't need to take all our land, 60,000 dunums. They laughed at me and they said, keep dreaming. But we are not dreaming because my children, my grandchildren, whatever it takes, they will return. And the return is sacred to Palestinians. It's legal in every item of international law. It's also feasible. And I believe it is inevitable.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. To what you're talking about, I would say, when did we start to prioritize the feelings of a thief over the reality of the victim?
So could you rephrase
And
that, please, Michael?
yeah, so people who ask you the racist question about what will happen if you return to your land, to those people, I would say, when did we start to prioritize the feelings of a thief over the lived reality of the victim, right? The people who were dispossessed of their land.
Yes, yes. And I say more. I say more. Pluck
Yeah.
Zionism out of your mind and style of life, and you're welcome. Why doesn't Jew in Palestine live like a Jew in London? Do they kill English people around? They just live there and rent a house or something. And I say, I welcome them. And in fact, many, not many, some Israelis I know who are anti Zionists actually left Israel because they say, why should I live in a land whose owner is a refugee camp, in a refugee camp. Why should they do that? And let me just add a legal point here. There is not a settler in Israel who has a title deed of the land he is occupying. A Palestinian can go to that village and say, I have a title deed to the land. Why are you squatting on my land? Do you have a title deed? He would say, no, I don't have a title deed. Then how are you staying in my land? He would say, it's given to me by Israel. Where? Who? It's called Land Israel Administration. Israel Administration took 20,500 square kilometers of Palestinian land and rents out to various kibbutzim on a lease of 49 years. It's extended. So actually, there is not a single kibbutz member or any Israeli other than in old Tel Aviv has a title deed of the land. But this very piece of land is registered in the name of a Palestinian who is now in a refugee camp. So when you return, you say, well, you are welcome as my guest, but you have no document. I have all the documents. You are squatting in my land. So legally, and even when we worked out the mechanism of return, really it's very simple. What is stopping this is what we started by talking about, the West, which supplies Israel with bombs and support now and before and in the foreseeable future. But this support, I believe strongly, not only as Palestinian, but as a historian and geographer, will not last, because you cannot keep things out of the ordinary in blaring injustice. You cannot keep it like that. History tells us always that this situation cannot last. Take, for example, the Goa, a Portuguese colony in India. It lasts for 200 years or whatever. It's gone. Look at Hong Kong and Mackay, British in China, colonies in China. These are like cysts. They cannot last in a body, in a homogeneous body, for a long time. Only by force of arms. You can hold them by the strength of your arms. One day your arms will be weak. Then things fall out and stay in the natural permanent position. So I think that's why I say return is inevitable. How much blood will be shed? How much suffering will be? How much pages of black history will be written by the Zionists and their support in the West will be written. This is what we have to find out.
Yes, absolutely. Your family has a long history of resisting the occupation. Your older brother was a key figure in the revolts that liberated your lands, Beersheba, from the British for a full year. So, in a sense, we can see what the future could look like by looking at the past. Can you tell us about that 1 year where Palestinians set up their own government for and by the people?
Yes, yes. In 1936, Palestinians find out that the Jewish European immigrants under the British reached a big proportion. There were 350,000 at the time in which all of Palestine was 1.5 million people. So they revolted against the foreign intruders in their country, especially it was against the promises of Britain that after the First World War, Palestine will be free. Palestine was considered to be Mandate Class A, similar to Iraq, also Mandate Class A. In 1920-22, Iraq became independent place in the country, while the British reneged on their undertaking and allowed Jewish immigrants under Balfour Promise to come to Palestine. So the Palestinians in the mid 30s were alarmed at the number of European immigrants, actually. And so they started revolting. against them. This revolt lasted for 3 years until 1939. My brother, who was a young man then, was leader of a rebellion in Beersheba district. They actually bombed British trains carrying arms. They actually expelled the British from Beersheba and all their police stations, and about 10 police stations spread over the Beersheba district, and also in Gaza, Khan Yunis, up to Al-Majdal. Although in Al-Majdal and Gaza, the British retained nominal presence. But in all the rest, especially in Beersheba, there was not a single British official. And they declared a national government in Beersheba from November 1938 to November 1939, and they set up a court and a government and everything. In 1939, under sadly I say it, the promise of Arab rulers, they asked the Palestinians to cease their revolt because, I quote, the Arab kings have relied on the goodwill of Great Britain to make Palestine free and independent. Please stop your revolt because the goodwill of Britain will bring you independence. And they believed them. Of course, it was false. Then the Second World War started, and you know the rest. The ironic twist in history is that the Zionists, who benefited a great deal, unbelievably, from the British, they armed them, they trained them, they brought them to the country. They, in 1945 and the end of Second War, turned against their benefactors, and they started a terrorist campaign against the British to kick them out of Palestine. So we have no need for you now. We can take over Palestine itself. So coming back to my brother and his colleagues, by the way, people from Al Khalil, Hebron, also had a united front covering southern part of Palestine. But moreover, my father in 1915 was with his uncle. He was a young man then, but his uncle was older. He was a leader of 15 horsemen, 1915, who marched from Beersheba to the Suez Canal to attack the British in Egypt. And because they were planning to come to invade Palestine. And my father's uncle was killed. Of course, in these times, he had a sword. He was fighting with a sword, and the British had machine guns, which we did not have. So they won the battle in the first day. And the second day, the British brought machine guns and mounted many of them, and my father's uncle was killed. So my father carried him on his horse and returned, and they prayed for the martyrs in Aqsa Mosque at that time. Well, I could go further. In 1840, my great-great-great-grandfather had, according to a document I found in Istanbul, had made a league, an agreement or a contract or whatever you call it, that all the people in southern Palestine and in Sinai up to Egypt and in Jordan, they should get together and sign an agreement that they will not fight each other because there were local feuds and disputes and so on. So this document of my great-great-great-grandfather of 1840 is, by the way, the year in which Balfour was born. So we preceded Balfour, and we fight for our country ever since.
I have one more question about Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student who has been arrested by ICE.
As I said earlier, the rise of the voice of the young people in Europe and the United States in the universities is a remarkable development. These young people have two qualities which the Western politicians don't have. Number one, they are educated, and many Western leaders are uneducated, or if you are educated, they are racist. That's number one. Number two, the young people have no financial gains or wealth to lose. All these politicians are probably bribed or have money or position they are afraid to. So these two qualities of the young people in Europe and America and anywhere else are unique. They make them perfect witnesses um, to, um, to the injustice and perfect advocates of justice. So Mahmoud Khalil, who has a green card, ha- have done what is expected of a university student. You are there to learn. Truth is your weapon. Justice is your way of dealing with things. And he just did that, like hundreds of thousands of, 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 of students and young people around the world. To make him penalized for that, it is a way to kill the principles on which this is based. And actually, this is the retardation um, of of civilized principles. I mean, I'm surprised. What is the university to do if they don't teach knowledge and freedom of expression? These are very unusual times, and again and again, I worry and I feel ashamed actually of future generations when they read about this and say, how could you live in that environment and not do something about it?
Dr. Salman, one last question if you have one more minute.
Yes, quickly, please.
Um, I want to hear your views on how you felt when you saw the photo that came from Gaza of the Israeli soldier sitting down in a chair holding your atlas for Palestine, which was in a library in Gaza.
Well, thank you. I thank you for this question because it started me and also started many people I know. Here is this soldier sitting on a chair browsing my atlas, and he was in the house of a relative of mine. It was not a library. This relative of mine is the father of my nephew, Dr. Ghassan's wife. My nephew, Dr. Ghassan, the surgeon, war surgeon, very well known, his wife, that's her family's house, and that is her father's house, and that's her father's sitting room. And I remember a long time ago, I presented him with the atlas as a present. And so they came to the house, they destroyed the house completely, and there's a garden, nice garden with trees. They cut the trees, and then they went round. One of these soldiers found the atlas. He sat down for a moment because he's not afraid of being shot at, and browsed the atlas. In my view, I was wondering if he is intelligent, if he has an iota of education, he knows this is the country he is invading, and these are the people he is now attacking. By the way, they killed um, my um, the brother of the house owner, and the house owner has been imprisoned for 3 months and tortured. He's still alive. So this soldier, if he has any kind of education, if he has any kind of sense of civilization, which he pretends to have when he goes back to the United States or Europe, saying, posing as a civilized person, what did you think when you sat in a house which you demolished and you killed the brother of the owner of the house, and you looked at this, all facts, all maps, all details? Did you say, I am a villain, I am a war criminal? Or you say, oh, they are dreaming, they are thinking of the impossible, or whatever it is? I tried to trace him. A friend or acquaintance of mine, a journalist in Australia, traced this soldier, and he could not get any reaction from him. But again, just I conclude by saying, if this guy has an iota of education or sense of justice, he should feel ashamed by committing a crime in a house whose record is in his hands. That is what definition of Zionism, killing civilization. That's their definition.
A beautiful place to end. Thank you so much, Dr. Salman. Very powerful intervention. We are very indebted for all of your work and commitment and dedication over the years. And one of the most impressive things about visiting you was seeing all of the binders in your office. You are a library all onto yourself. Just a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much. And we are so grateful.
Thank you very much, Lara and Michael. And I'm delighted if your audience will find any of this useful for them.
Folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Palestine Pod. Find our full episodes and sources at www.palestinepod.com. Follow us on Instagram at The Palestine Pod. Send us an email at palestinepod@gmail.com. And look for us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/PalestinePod. That has been another episode of the pod. Thank you all so much for listening. Have as good a day as you can.
We can start telling people to join the Patreon. The show wouldn't be possible without a Patreon. You got to get on our Patreon. Support us on Patreon. You can, because like I've been watching all these other podcasts and they just keep plugging Patreon like all the time.
Yeah, I'm going to clip what you just did right now.
Okay.